told by the managers here that from tomorrow, a teacher will take examination scripts, followed by his askari and into the vehicle. So that if we trace a malpractice at point X, we know the center manager who is concerned, we know the supervisor who is concerned, and we also know the security person who is concerned.
That's Professor George Magoha. He's the chair of the Kenya National Examination Council. We're speaking about exam integrity on The Big Story tonight. Still have with me Dr. John Mugo as well as Amos Kaburu on this subject. So we'll get into the new curriculum in just a moment. It's being piloted in several schools across the country. But first, the Cabinet Secretary had decried the atmosphere in which these exams are being conducted with everything that had been happening with the elections. Amos, I want to start with you. Do you think this will affect the students' concentration and their performance?
Thank you, Yvonne. I think it is quite unfortunate that our students had to go through these examinations during such a very, very difficult time. There are lots of controversies, especially around the leadership and how it has conducted itself during this time, including the Cabinet Secretary himself being found in situations that are a little bit quite unfamiliar to him. And what we saw happening in Kawangware was quite unfortunate to young people. And considering that in the next 5 years, this is going to be another 1.7 million voters that people will be scampering for their votes. So it's quite unfortunate what students have had to go through just the time before the examinations where they were not even sure whether they will be sitting for the examinations or not. So maybe it's just to give them confidence that that is not the end of the world, but definitely most of these students are highly affected by the environment in which this was happening. Schools had to close a little bit earlier. There were times when the election period was happening and there was a lot of anxiety around the country. So it was quite a very, very unfortunate moment for our students to be undertaking the examinations. Okay,
and even while all of that was going on, we've been piloting the new curriculum. Dr. Mugo, talk to us about it. What are your thoughts surrounding it? Will this be the silver bullet that we have been looking for? We have reformed our curriculum a number of times in this country. What do you make of this one?
Yeah, I think for the first time, I feel we have been pretty bold. The same thing happened in 1983, 1984, in reforming the previous one. This boldness to bring something new and change the way people think and view practice of education is very important. I have hope from where I sit, because one of the things I've been arguing that we ought to introduce in our system is thinking, is more space for thinking and doing. When you look at the instructional practice we've been having now, is one of contents and remembering and cramming. Yet you don't find these things being applied in life. You cannot cram life. You can only prepare for new situations and handle them the way they emerge. So I have seen that this new curriculum has space for children to experiment more, for children to research more, to engage with the environment, for teachers to be facilitators of knowledge rather than custodians of our contents and dishing these out. I have seen a situation where we have less examination and less high-stake examination with the promise of 100% transition between primary and secondary. So if all these things are implemented the way they are now in the designs, I see that we'll make positive progress.
Okay, Amos, we talked about preference, or rather preference being given to access versus quality. And many have argued that with the free secondary education and moving students from all the way from primary into secondary, that we have not taken a look at the facilities, the structures, training the teachers, increasing the number of classrooms as well. I mean, we'll come back to the curriculum, but this is also a big thing when you look at transition rates. Do you believe enough has been done first, or is it putting the cart before the horse?
Thank you, Yvonne. Definitely we are putting the cart before the horse. but we want to be hopeful that perhaps things will have changed. But I think that when we have reservations around the implementation of free-day secondary education, it's based on the historical factors. This is not the first time that we're having big political or regime announcements around education. The memories of 2003 are still very, very fresh in our minds, how FPE was hurriedly implemented without putting the necessary infrastructure in place. And one of the challenges that perhaps we think that transition is all about just providing rooms for children to go to. But we forget that the critical ingredients towards realizing any desired outcome or impact has got to do with the service providers, who are more or less the fulcrum of this process. And I am not very, very sure that we've done enough in terms of preparation of our service providers, who are teachers, to handle what is coming ahead of them. We have got serious issues even just in terms of how disbursements and how resources are sent back to our schools. Schools are basically struggling because even with what has been happening, the cost that households are bearing for education has still been so high. And even the very definition of free-day secondary education itself is still faulty, because how free is the free? Because we still have components that households still have to spend. And households are still going to spend on uniforms, households are still going to spend on food, on health and such. So it's still, to be very precise, that is about free tuition. But I think that we needed to have done a little bit more in terms of preparing stakeholders, because up to right now we still have got quite a number of unanswered questions. Yes, there is the 6 billion allocated for infrastructure, for the upgrade of specific facilities, but it's not just enough, because one of the other things that we need to consider is that the numbers have gone high. We're talking about 1 million children. So that means that you need to be talking about an additional 25,000 classrooms that ought to be put in place. And I don't think that we have got that zeal and will. And that's not just enough. We're talking about dormitory facilities. We are talking about libraries. We're talking about many, many other things that we still have to battle with. So I think that there is much that needs to be done. But I think let's give the government the benefit of doubt that there's always a starting point. And this is a positive move in the right direction. For those of us who've really been arguing for the right to free and compulsory basic education that is well defined in the Basic Education Act of 2013.
I want to ask this because have we done a proper audit of the impact of free primary education that would then inform the rollout, or perhaps a different approach to the rollout of free secondary, day secondary education? John, has that happened? Should we need to?
Yeah, there was one of the reports, the end of decade assessment. There is, I think, adequate evidence to know the mistakes we made in implementing free primary education, in also implementing the 2008. Remember, in 2008, there was some movement where some subsidy came. At that time, the way it was put politically was that actually free, that the day secondary educations were to be free, but we knew they were not going to be, given the amount of 9,000. So this time round, there is promise that it's going to be entirely free. But I see two things to this, Yvonne. One is that when you look at the cost of secondary education, we need drastic measures. One is to think about doing away with boarding secondary schools for two reasons. One is the cost, because if then that cost came down, it would be easier to have equitable quality across all schools, and invest those resources in other areas, and not sticking children in boarding schools. The other one, and I had this a very deep reflection today talking to Father Romano in a place called Nairutia in Nyeri County, is the role of parenting. On the one hand, we are complaining that parents are not engaged enough in our education system. On the other hand, we are the same people who we are doing systemic sticking of 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds in boarding schools and withdrawing them from their parents. So aren't we contradicting ourselves? In resolving parental engagement, one of the things is a call that let children be with their parents, because that is the way society is organized. We cannot trust institutions to teach values, to teach all these things that need to be taught to our children. So even as we do this free day secondary education, we need to accompany that with rather out of the box and very radical measures to bring sanity to our secondary education.
Okay, so when we're talking about involvement of stakeholders, some have decried, the curriculum reform, saying it hasn't adequately involved stakeholders like parents, as you've mentioned, John, as well as teachers, that they perhaps have not been involved. And have we really changed the pedagogy, or, is it just the same? Have we just reduced the number of subjects and said we will not have one big final examination, rather have continuous assessment over time, and that counts to the final one? What are your thoughts as to how we are changing the approach to teaching in the classroom, Amos?
Thanks, Yvonne. I think that if you look at any curriculum reform process, this is one of the most progressive approach that we've ever taken. This has been a very, very consultative process. It's really been informed by a lot of evidence. There is a lot that has happened in terms of stakeholder engagement. It's just that some of these statements are a little bit controversial and not very, very easy to standardize. For instance, how much consultation is enough is something that is a little bit very, very difficult for us to quantify. But I think that there is sufficient information. Sometimes my analysis of a society that we live in is that we're highly a society that is too excited and very limited towards details because we really want to pick up on the low-hanging fruits and issues that perhaps stimulate lots of emotions. And that's why when we discuss issues of curriculum reforms, people only focus on the issue of numbers. And the numbers have never been an issue, whether you repackage the education into 16 years or whether into 15 years or what. The issue has never been about the number of years, but the issue is about the philosophical shifts in terms of moving away from what John has called lots of content, the way it is designed. One of the fundamental issues that we have in our current curriculum is that there is too much of teaching, very little of learning. And I'll demonstrate it by use of what you go to a school and teachers tell you that I've covered the syllabus. It's very easy for teachers to cover the syllabus, but learners never started to cover the syllabus. They were left right on topic one. So these are some of the issues that the new curriculum sought to cure by how do you ensure that teachers, and I'm going to repeat the words that John said, teachers facilitate more learning as opposed to teachers being the custodians of learning. And one of the most critical skills that this curriculum mentions is what Fulan calls learning to learn. That is taking charge of your own education, and therefore putting in place mechanisms that you're being supported by the facilitators of learning, for you to take charge of your learning, for you to be able to understand that every learner has got something that they bring onto the table. You cannot have what Albert Einstein says, that if you have to judge the fish by its level of climbing a tree, then definitely will always be a failure. Yeah. So these are some of the issues that the new curriculum ought to, it seeks to address. So I would encourage Kenyans to look at this because this information is available, is already in the public domain. But it's just that many of us as Kenyans, we want to run away with, we want to run with those quick issues such as the number of years it did, when is it starting for implementation and such. Yeah. But however, what is very critical as someone who's really interacted with this process is our level to which we have prepared our teachers, so that if we don't prepare them very well, then people end up to interpret and practice what they know best. So if we do not equip our teachers with the sufficient skills, and in this case it's not just about the skills, but about the paradigm shift in the attitudes and the practices that they adopt in the class, so that they're seeing themselves as facilitators of knowledge and no longer as custodians of information. This is not something that can be changed overnight. This is not something that you can change within a day. Right. So it has to go through a lot, and that's why some of us have advised that it's important that we've got a change management strategy, whether it means bringing on board a change management specialist to work with the over 300,000 teachers that we already have. Number two is to focus on those who are already still in the teacher training institutions, including our public universities, which are preparing teachers for secondary schools, and the over 20 teacher training colleges, so that they give to us the right material of the teachers who can prepare the learners who will be able to get the best out of the proposed curriculum. Otherwise, if you don't do that, then it's still what I call the making of a white elephant.
I see. Okay. John, I want to give you the last word in our conversation tonight. Just to recap the long-term measures that we can put in place to ensure, you know, the sanctity of exams, as we've talked about it. I mean, it's incidental that the Cabinet Secretary for Education is also holding the security docket in an acting capacity and is therefore able to draw resources from one ministry to another to ensure a secure examination environment. What are your thoughts of this going forward as we close?
Going forward, parents and teachers need to reconsider the noble role they are given to bring up a generation that will take over from us. This will not happen if we are the ones stealing for our children, if we are the ones demonstrating lack of integrity. I think if every parent and teacher were a police to themselves, then this issue would end. The place of values need to be reconsidered. Parents and teachers really need to understand that we are educating for the future. It is that A that is stolen will not be sustainable, and it will not be of much help because you have taught that person that they can always take shortcuts. So what will happen when shortcuts are no longer available in the society? They will end up failures. So let's look at the broad picture. In terms of the new curriculum, let's seek information, let's understand it, but it will depend on teachers changing their attitude. If teachers were to change, then learning will be transformed in this country.
All right, that's a good place to leave it tonight. Thank you very much, Dr. John Mugo and Amos Kaburu, both experts in the education sector, for being on the show with us tonight. We thank you for your time. This is The Big Story. I'm Yvonne Okwara Matole. I'll see you again tomorrow. Good night.